David Cronenberg's 1986 hit The Fly and Franz Kafka's 1915 story The Metamorphosis both follow men experiencing unexpected and disturbing transformations into insects. As many 15 to 35-year-old women have done to their boyfriends, partners, and lovers, these beg the question, would I still be loved if I were a bug? And why the bug of all things? Today, I want to explore the ideas behind creepy, crawly transformations in Cronenberg and Kafka's works. Who is the unlovable bug? And what does it really represent? Bonjour everybody and welcome to Cannes, France, where I'm here for the Cannes Film Festival. And one thing that has made my journey across 6 different countries exponentially easier is using Saley's eSIM. And what actually is it? Saley is a simple eSIM app that helps you stay connected in over 200 places around the world. There's no physical card or SIM card swapping, it's just one app download. Here I am doing a top up in Greece, and as you can see, it's as easy as selecting the area you're traveling from this list. I'm clicking the global plan because would you look at that, now I'm in France, bonjour! And I'm completing another easy top up on the go. Saley has global and regional plans, so you'll never have to worry about buying an airport SIM again. And Saley even saves on mobile data by blocking pop-ups and background activity, so it's always ready when you need it, no precious data wasted. So you can use my discount girlonfilm and click the link in the description for an exclusive 15% off Saley eSIM data plans. Thank you again to Saley, thank you to Cannes. I look forward to bringing you all of my Cannes Film Festival videos over the next couple of months.
Can you even see what's on the screen?
Too much glare.
Have you not been able to see what's on the screen the entire time?
So for a lot of my life, I thought Salman Rushdie, who is very much still alive, and Franz Kafka were the same person. In Bridget Jones's Diary, there is a memorable scene where she meets Salman Rushdie at a book launch for a fake book called Kafka's Motorbike. I saw that film for the first time when I was 7, so I always associated Rushdie and Kafka to the point where my brain just combined them. And then when I was maybe 21 years old, I was like, oh shit, the guy that has a cameo in Bridget Jones's Diary is not in fact the Czech author who died in 1924. Who could have guessed? The actual man in question, Franz Kafka, was a Czech-born German speaker who lived between 1883 and 1924. While he wrote for most of his life, sadly, like many other great authors of the past, he never really knew the impact of his work, experiencing significant depression and anxiety and dying of tuberculosis at age 42, unlike Salman Rushdie, who is thriving at 77. When it comes to his wider cultural impact, Kafka is probably most recognized for the eponymy Kafkaesque, which describes extremely confusing, nightmarish situations often rooted in bureaucracy, and for writing The Metamorphosis, which is, not coincidentally, an extremely confusing and nightmarish situation rooted in bureaucracy. Kafka wrote the short story in 1912 in his early 20s, and it was published in 1915. It tells the story of Grigor Samsa, a salesman who supports his parents and sister, who wakes one morning as a bug. It's at times quite dry and comical, at other times incredibly depressing and painful to read. I've just realised that this is the first time I'm extensively covering a book, and that means that there isn't footage to put on screen. I don't know what I'm going to do about that. I will attempt to include some pleasant Beatle interludes, or just Beatle-esque footage. The Metamorphosis begins strongly with the line, as Grigor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. Hilariously, his first instinct is to ignore his baffling transformation and stay in bed, but then he can't sleep because he finds in his new body he can't roll onto his side, which is, in my opinion, the exact emotional experience of waking up with a hangover. From there, Grigor's main concern is how he can still make it to work and the many repercussions of not getting there. A decent chunk of the story takes place with Grigor making pleas to his family and his manager that he'll sort everything out. He's desperate not to cause a problem. He wants to be a working cog in the machine. I don't want to bore you with a super long-winded explanation of the story, but I will give you a rough rundown of what happens, because I know I certainly hadn't read this until recently. But yes, I read books, by the way. Over the course of about a month, we're taken through Grigor's transformation. Pointedly, his body is changed immediately. The metamorphosis isn't speaking to the horrors of seeing your body change gradually or focusing on the grotesqueness of non-human life. Rather, as is now considered Kafkaesque, we're seeing the practical outcomes of this twisted situation, handled with a sterile awkwardness and pragmatic discomfort from all involved. The transformation is a social one, a societal one. His family at first tries to adapt to his situation, caring for him as much as possible, but are resentful of him for many reasons. His parents and sister all have to find jobs, they cannot move house, they cannot have lodgers. Grigor no longer fills his role and is nothing more than a pest. Equally, they are fearful and disgusted by him, with only his sister Greta coming in to see him, clean his room, and feed him. Horrifyingly, as we hear Grigor's thoughts throughout the story, we know he is fully conscious and constantly attempting to communicate, but his voice is unintelligible to everyone around him. Within a month of his transformation, Grigor has become frightened, garbage-eating vermin, intolerable even to his sister. A moment of emotional conflict comes for Grigor when his mother, in the hopes that he will become human again and won't regress into full Samsa Beetle, suggests they leave his furniture in his room. And he questions himself whether he's happy to give up his humanness by giving up the furniture. Even though it pains him to acknowledge it, he realizes that he would like the room to be empty so he has space to crawl. Once again, many of my past hangovers have created this very same effect. Now we're getting to the drama. In a moment of distress, Grigor's dad tries to kill him, and Greta asks to spare his life, but after a stressful run-in with some lodgers, Greta, who now refers to Grigor as it, agrees that he needs to be disposed of. Hearing that they want him gone, Grigor simply curls up and dies. The family disposes of him, and the less often discussed ending sees them happily agreeing that the now beautiful and womanly Greta is ready to find a husband and effectively enter society. End scene. That, roughly speaking, is Kafka's The Metamorphosis, the dreary tale that has gone down in history as one of literature's great and notable works. In Grigor's pitiful story, Kafka ponders, would I be loved if I were a bug, and settles on a dismal, realistic truth that reflects our still rigid society. And what of The Fly? What does visionary director and body horror icon David Cronenberg have to add to the mythology of the unlovable bug? David Cronenberg's The Fly is in many ways telling the same story. While we do get the thrills and spills of body horror in the Cronenberg classic, the grotesqueness of the gooey physical change is in many ways not the priority of this human-to-insect transformation. Cronenberg chooses to frame his story through love, and to focus on the deterioration of the mind and the body. Significant to note that before it was a film, The Fly was also a short story by French-British writer Georges Langelaan. It was then adapted into a 1958 film, the 1986 film, and as I recently learned, a 2008 opera. It's generally believed to be the case that Langelaan was not influenced by Kafka in his short story. It's a bit harder to tell if Cronenberg was taking inspiration from Kafka. He's often referred to in reviews and write-ups as a dedicated Kafka fan, but as for where that information is coming from, I'm stumped. Direct quotes from Cronenberg about Kafka influencing The Fly are nout. The closest thing I could find was this article that says Jeff Goldblum read The Metamorphosis on set. So we can only ponder. Cronenberg did write about the Metamorphosis in 2014, but again, there's no discussion of it inspiring The Fly, only comparing them. But back to the film. For anyone unfamiliar, The Fly follows scientist Seth Brundle, played by Jeff Goldblum in his sexiest role, in my opinion, who accidentally mutates his DNA with that of a humble housefly. Early in the film, pre-Fly Seth meets Ronnie, a science journalist played by Gina Davis. A misunderstanding that leaves Brundle thinking Ronnie has left him spurs him on to attempt to teleport a human, which is when the great fly mix-up happens in his teleportation pods. At first, it's a fun Spider-Man style transformation that sees him with new abilities and strengths. But Ronnie is concerned by Seth's growing aggression and arrogance, as well as some less than desirable physical changes. During all of this, Ronnie discovers that she's pregnant and not wanting to give birth to a fly baby. She almost gets an abortion. I don't know if I can say that. In a heartbreaking moment, signaling that his humanity is almost entirely gone, Brundle says to Ronnie, "I'm an insect who dreamt he was a man and loved it, but now the dream is over and the insect is awake." A now almost entirely transformed Brundlefly kidnaps her and attempts to use the telepods again to fuse himself with her and their unborn child. The film ends with the Brundlefly accidentally fusing himself with the telepod and silently begging a devastated Veronica to shoot him, to which she obliges. The film might sound like classic, goofy 80s fun, very overdramatic and schlocky, but I was so taken aback by how emotional The Fly was on first watch. To be fair, I will cry at almost anything, but I was an absolute puddle by the end of this the first time I saw it. Gina Davis is incredible in the final scenes, and it's heartbreaking watching Ronnie watch the man she fell in love with completely disappear. The Brundle arc, as with Grigor Samsa, is so much more than just a physical change. Where the Samsa beetle remains painfully himself inside, it's clear Brundle's mind is also experiencing transformation. He loses his humanity, his intelligence, thoughtfulness, perhaps not his soul, and certainly not his ability to feel pain and even heartbreak, as the ending would imply, but everything that meant he was able to function in relationships with people is gone. Cronenberg's work often deals with transformation and mutation, but the emotional implications here are excruciating. Cronenberg's Brundlefly design is gruesome, visceral, and one of the reasons this film is cited as one of horror's greats. Brundle is reduced to a seething mass of flesh, metal, and acid vomit. In contrast, Grigor Samsa is described by Kafka in plain, simple language, creating an unfussy picture of the Samsa beetle. To quote the Metamorphosis, Samsa is described as having a hard, as if it were armor-plated back, and when he lifted his head a little, he could see his dome-like brown belly, divided into stiff, arched segments on top of which the bedquilt could hardly keep position. Also, he had numerous legs which were pitifully thin. As much as neither creature is a beauty, the horror of both of these stories is not about what it's like to simply be a bug. It isn't about having a hairy body or 6 legs or a taste for garbage. The horror here is about how being a bug prevents you from being a human, the thing that you're supposed to be. The true horror of these new bodies is how they strip Grigor Samsa and Seth Brundle of their humanity. Change is frightening. Changing into something you don't want to be, even more so. And for Seth Brundle, the cherry on top of this horrific scenario is that the change happens slowly. Rather than wake up one day in a different body as Kafka's Samsa beetle does, Brundle is gradually aware of what he's going to lose and forced to reckon with himself at various stages of Brundlefly integration. In the introduction of a reprint to Metamorphosis, which can be found online at the Paris Review, Cronenberg wrote that many people initially assumed his film to be a parallel for AIDS. Something that he understood as, quote, AIDS was on everybody's mind and the vast scope of the disease was gradually being revealed. It's easy to understand why the connection to the AIDS virus was made by 80s audiences. But there are also parallels between Brundle's transformation and various degenerative diseases. From the loss of physical abilities to drastic changes in demeanor, Seth's transformation frequently reflects conditions like dementia, MS, and Parkinson's. But Cronenberg has an even simpler explanation for his fly's condition. For me, Brundle's disease was more fundamental. In an artificially accelerated manner, he was aging. He was a consciousness that was aware that it was a body that was mortal, and with acute awareness and humour participated in that inevitable transformation that all of us face, if only we live long enough. Aging is the silent and unavoidable truth of human life, something that happens to all of us, and yet we collectively try to ignore it. As a people, we seem so uncomfortable with accepting that we will lose our youth, that we may lose mobility, speech, and maybe even worse, our dignity, the respect and love of others around us. We let our elderly disappear. As with the realities of age, Brundle is barreling towards a grim fate with no way of stopping it. He just has to wait for it to take place. While his transformation is less about his body and more about his lifestyle, Grigor also experiences this painful journey of walking the path of the inevitable. He admits to himself that he'd rather his room were cleared of furniture so he can crawl around more easily. He knows there is no going back, so with only little resistance, he accepts that this is his life now. In an uncomfortable parallel to what we expect of the elderly, he accepts that in this state of existence, his life isn't worth paying attention to. Slow and inevitable change is brutal, because all we can do is accept it. I've noticed recently this idea of inevitability is a common theme in things I personally find frightening or upsetting. It's here in The Fly and Metamorphosis, it's in Beau is Afraid, which I talked about recently, it's in Final Destination, which I can't even bring myself to watch. Stories are simply that much bleaker when there is no reprieve, solution, or light at the end of the tunnel. And Brundle and Grigor reach the end of their stories by dying, sealing the fate that we are all headed for. Another horror at play in these stories is the loss of communication. This twisted concept of being trapped in a cage that you can't communicate through. In the Metamorphoses, the loss of Grigor's speech is instant. At first, he doesn't realize because he can understand himself, but hears his manager through the door say he has the voice of an animal. Another parallel with the elderly, Grigor's inability to communicate means he's subjected to the whims of his family. They make decisions for him without his involvement. None of them really know what he wants and how he feels despite his efforts to communicate, and this leaves him completely isolated from the moment he wakes up in his new buggy body. As the reader, we know the entire time that Grigor is himself inside. Like, actually take a moment to imagine how it would feel. It gives me shivers. I haven't actually read this myself, but I'm aware of the short story I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. And even hearing that title makes me so uncomfortable because the concept is so deeply unsettling. In The Fly, Brundle's speech is one of the last things to go. Physically, he has devolved into something far from human, and the last thing he had, his ability to communicate, leaves him unrecognizable. And in the end, given that we don't ever hear Brundle's internal monologue, we don't know what truly remains of him. We know that he chose to die, but why, it's not entirely clear. Perhaps he was completely himself inside, soul intact, knowing he wouldn't survive in the human world. Perhaps he was all fly, his death motivated only by a desire to resolve the physical pain of the machine fusion. It's left as a haunting existential question for the audience. The idea that he could be wholly himself inside makes his death all the more tragic. One film that I don't think I will ever be able to watch, but that I am fascinated and haunted by, is Tusk. Spoilers for the ending of Tusk. We kind of end in a similar place to The Fly, with Justin Long trapped in his mutilated walrus body, but then his partner doesn't kill him. I think because she can't bring herself to kill him. But they keep him like a pet in their garden, and he can't do anything about it because he can't speak. And with the biological specifics of a walrus, he can barely even flap about and cause a fuss. This film makes me sick. As sad as the ending of The Fly is, I think this is actually worse. So, well done, Kevin Smith, you absolute freak. Death is terrifying, but being stuck in a cage you can't communicate through is quite literally an untold horror. Without being too preachy, it's a necessary reminder to be as supportive, understanding, and kind as possible when meeting people who experience this reality due to illness and other legitimate circumstances. One of the core ideas at play that is more uncomfortable than it is frightening is looking at how we respond to abnormality. In these stories, we observe the experience of someone no longer deemed acceptably human. The brundlefly and the Samsa beetle are viewed with pity, disgust, and fear, but never with hope. Every reaction rooted in misunderstanding and dehumanization, and an inability to adapt to perceived abnormality. The discomfort here comes from the idea that other people's perceptions of us can rob you of a life, and the world built by whichever majority group has determined themselves normal is often not equipped to support anyone outside of that. Something felt by minority groups, whether it be people of colour, oppressed classes, women, people with disabilities, or mental health conditions. This reading is very much up for interpretation regarding society's rejection of other minority groups, but we know for sure that Kafka spoke to the experience of mental illness. Grigor attempts to reassure himself that his situation is surely not abnormal. Quote, Grigor tried to imagine if anything similar to what was happening to him today had also once happened to the manager. But Grigor is wrong. The manager simply gets the job done. This is a confirmation of Grigor's greatest fear, that he is unlike others. Franz Kafka himself was a small, sickly man with an anxiety disorder, and it's no wonder he felt so concerned about his potential inability to live up to this demand. I've vaguely covered these ideas already, but as someone with Crohn's disease, a reasonably debilitating illness, I share this anxiety. There is an immense sense sometimes that you can't keep up with everybody else, that you never will, and that your future is doomed. I've never felt more like Grigor Samsa than on days when I slither out of my bed straight onto the floor and I'm unable to walk to the kitchen or to the bathroom. And I know this feeling of failing to meet the demands of the modern world is shared by many for a multitude of reasons. Cruelly for Grigor, even the association with him could be detrimental to upholding normalcy. I mentioned earlier that the ending of Metamorphosis sees Grigor's sister Greta older, happy, and entering society. This is her own metamorphosis into an adult. She is complete. I feel this final sting emphasizes the idea that abnormality is to be feared even further. She who conformed and who knew Grigor was unsightly and would only burden them was able to blossom in the expected, approved way, and now becomes a member of the normal world. But she had no blockades or obstacles. She didn't wake up one day with the body of a bug or find her world slowly falling apart around her. There was nothing about her that didn't fit the constructs of society at that time. Like Greta, people often don't know what to do with people who challenge normalcy and can see them only as vermin, a pest, a nuisance, infecting our perfect lives. So they distance themselves from it. To see or hear or acknowledge those that are different, to dare to support or uplift them, disrupts the ongoing and self-supporting churn of our capitalist society. What was that? Yes, we're going to talk about capitalism. Now, I know it sounds a bit silly to say that this story of a giant bug is secretly all about capitalism. This isn't ants. But this is not a stretch. Kafka's Metamorphosis is literally about capitalism. The Samsa beetle can't work, which means he can't earn money and he can't support his family. As a cog in the machine, he has faltered. His place as family breadwinner is shaken. When he wakes up in his insect body, the first thing that concerns Grigor Samsa is his inability to get to work. Because without getting to work, he'll lose his job, and without his job, he won't be able to financially support his family, as was expected of a young man in the 1910s. The Fly doesn't explore this idea in such a blatant way, but it still presents facets of capitalism in the story. I think the pregnancy is a crucial key to this reading, as it taunts Brundle with the potential to enter a family unit. And the family unit, in the form of man, woman, and baby, is the one designed to uphold our current capitalist system. In The Fly, Brundle loses his ability to abide by the social values of the time and be a leading lover man. He loses his ability to be a good partner, to work, and to support Veronica and a family. Her choice to abort their child actively engages in this idea of family as the norm, with Brundle unable to fulfill it. I know the child is a fly, and that's also a fair reason to ditch it, but it is also a metaphor. These stories ruminate on failing to uphold the capitalist structures in our society that keep it functioning as is. From finances to family and back to finances, because it's all about money, money, money. But rather than this being an act of anarchy, it's one of alienation, warning us if you can't contribute to capitalism, then you cannot partake in it. So, as explored, the unlovable bug represents a multitude of ideas that centre on disconnect and abnormality. There's the Kafkaesque perspective existing in the nightmare world of capitalism and feeling that we can't keep up. There's the idea of illness and age separating us from our peers. You could take a broader look at the text, reflecting the experience of minority groups and their constant othering. There are a million potential readings, but ultimately the unlovable bug is who we all fear we are deep down. The person who does not belong. The idea haunts every person, follows us through interactions with family, lovers, workplaces, wider society. We all feel our own otherness so intensely, regardless of how the world validates it. We all have moments where we feel like the unlovable bug. These two stories dare to ask the question, would I be loved if I were a bug, and present their chilling cases. It's in these horror shows, the lack of compassion, visibility, and understanding, that we see the ugly answer.
We're live in 3.
We should have been live.
No, we're still live.
Stop.
She's going to cut it, just keep it going.
Oh, that makes so much more sense.
Did it flick? Are there more? Can you even see what's on the screen?
Too much glare.
Have you not been able to see what's on the screen the entire time?
Can you turn the light?